And start with introductions. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're so glad that you could be with us. Thanks for taking an hour out of your day to join us. I'm Cindy Sesegoy. I'm the Executive Director of the Cleveland 2030 District and one of the committee members that put this meeting together. As a network, we sent out this great little marketing flyer with 22 districts, and we're growing so fast that's already outdated. We are 23 districts now as of a week or two ago, with Victoria in BC joining us. So, one of the reasons we wanted to put this group together is since museums are such unique spaces with unique challenges and issues, we thought that it would be really advantageous for everyone if we could connect you all to museums participating in other districts. And so our hope for this group is that we can share best practices, we can expand everyone's network, provide educational speakers on topics of interest to you, and most importantly, I think, to create a trusted forum where you can have discussions on subjects that are unique to museums. It's not our intention for this group to share data, so no worries about that. I know most of the districts maintain confidentiality when it comes to data, so that's really not one of our objectives. But I'll talk about this a little bit later after Sarah presents, but we do want to send out a survey at the end of this to gauge your interest in different topics and how you want to shape this group. We really want this group to be of value to you, and so we want you to tell us how you
Cindy, you just went to mute.
That was very weird. I didn't touch a thing.
Being censored.
Okay, so in any case, I was saying that I'll explain at the end of the session here that we will be sending out a survey for you to give us feedback on how you want these sessions conducted, what topics are of interest to you, and so forth. I do want to, pardon me, I do want to introduce the committee to you. These are the other executive directors, along with myself, that formed this group. And so Peter Bardaglio from Ithaca, myself, Chaim Gross from New York City, Connie Lilly from Detroit, and Elizabeth Rojas from Cincinnati. So thanks to all of those executive directors for working together to get this group off and running. Just to give you an idea of who's participating today, and I might be missing a couple because we did have some late joiners this morning, and I wasn't able to update the slides, so I might be missing a couple, but you can see that we've got a really broad spectrum of different organizations that are on the call today. So thanks to all of you for being able to join. Now, we do want to share contact information. And so if by chance you do not want your email shared with the group, please let me know. We'll be sending this slide deck out along with a recording of Sarah's presentation afterwards, and my email is on there. So just let me know if you do not want your email shared. And now I'll move to introduce our guest speaker. We're very excited to have Sarah Sutton here. Sarah is the principal of Sustainable Museums, a consultancy for cultural organizations pursuing environmental sustainability and climate action. She's on the executive committee of We Are Still In, America is All In, the largest coalition of non-national supporters of the Paris Agreement anywhere in the world, and organizes its cultural institutions sector. She's a research fellow at Knology, teaches in the Harvard University Extension School Museum Studies program, and is a member of the newly appointed Climate Task Force for the American Psychological Association. Sarah is a co-author of 2 editions of The Green Museum as Sarah Brophy, and author of Environmental Sustainability at Historic Sites and Museums. She lives in Tacoma and partners worldwide for climate action. So help me welcome Sarah. Sarah, I'm going to stop sharing and allow you to pull up your slides.
Right. Well, hello, everybody. Good morning from Tacoma. Good afternoon, wherever you are. This is like seeing family because I know a bunch of the people that are part of this group, but it's like extended family. I haven't met everyone. So it's really nice to see an expansion of this group of cultural institutions focusing on climate work. 15 years ago, it was a very lonely field. Now it's not lonely at all. And even especially given that it is now 2021 and a new future, the excitement really is unbelievable. So I have gobs of stuff to share with you. It will be too much information. It will come too fast, and we will not worry about that because I feel strongly that this group, we were talking beforehand, is about at least sharing as much information and activity and action as we can. And then each of us takes it home and figures out how to implement it in the most useful way. So I'll give you as much as I know about top line stuff. So trends really pretty quickly. Think about COVID-19 and how it's transformed the way we work on climate and led beautifully to the way we have to tackle it in 2021. Talk about collaboration approaches and then give you some more details on what I hear about 2021. So, and this top line here about our visual performing arts organizations, museums, all of those groups, we are underused as climate allies within our sector and across the sector. That's my whole message, my whole purpose in life at the moment is to make sure that people who are creating change include cultural institutions as part of that process because they don't know how much we have to offer. And we need to keep pushing forward on that message that shows the whole gamut of stuff we can do to offer about climate action, health, economics, and equity. So we're going to fly right in. Oh, I forgot to give our organizers permission to interrupt me if there's a question about an acronym I'm using or any. If you have a question, please do interrupt if it improves the information flow. So I'm going to show you 3 slides here pretty quickly of different ways of looking at trends in the sector. Okay. They could overlap. You could do it in 3 different ways, 6 different ways. This is the way I'm just looking at it to give you an overview today. So if we look at 15 years of chronology, of evolution, of adopting climate and environment work, this is the way it seems to me to have evolved. It started with Children's Museum, top left corner, Madison Children's Museum, thinking about exhibits because of the things that the little visitors would climb over, crawl in, things that they would put in their mouths. They had to come up with a way to share safe conditions for children and families that were visiting their museums. And they really started the materials revolution. And then we shifted into building work, but children's museums again were the earliest ones to adopt it. So this is an example of the Children's Museum in Philadelphia. But then it shifted to natural history museums. This is Wagner Free Institute in Philadelphia. Science museums and science centers pretty much picked it up right about that same time of the natural history folks, because after all, environment and climate has strong science connections. which meant that the history museums like the Smithsonian bottom middle, and then the art museum like Perez on the corner right, were a little slower to pick up on it because they felt like climate and environment work was off mission, that it was mission creep to tackle this. And it took a little while for the sector to understand that anything we do to reduce impacts on environment and climate actually helps our collections, our communities, and our buildings. But that's pretty much not a discussion point any longer, I'm pleased to say. But if we looked at the way the sector implemented in individual buildings, people started off by making choices at a high impact location of gallery lighting or art history, any type of building, because they could make changes supported by the lighting sector that had a great return on investment pretty quickly. And it was a way you could make change without changing your whole structure. So gallery lighting was a first threshold to cross, and then learning how to measure and monitor and reduce energy use sort of came in as the next one. Resilient infrastructure in communities is the most recent development of implementation, I would say. Community engagement about how we tackle climate change was an easy win early on, but it's been one of the slowest ones to come along. Another way to look at chronology of approach is to look at buildings, is the timeline of the evolution in the field. We started off with the building sector coming from outside with architects and engineers that had special skills and sharing it with the cultural sector. And we had a strong push on LEED programs, well buildings, living buildings, up until we had the crash. And the crash stopped us from constructing new buildings. Now, the book on green museums came out in 2008, right when the crash happened. And I thought, God, how did I totally mistime all of this? All it meant was that we shifted from building to thinking about operations and programs. So it was a crisis that caused a necessary shift. And we built our skills and abilities in thinking about public engagement and building operations. And in 2009, a very cool thing came along. NOKI is the national network. Oh, it should have two N's, sorry. National Network of Ocean and Climate Change Interpreters. So this is a National Science Foundation funded project that helped people learn how to engage the public in aquariums and zoos on talking about climate change. And it broke ground on how to think about climate change communication and understand our visitors. And from that point on, we shifted into more thinking about climate engagement. So this is a map of NOKI. And then in 2017, We Are Still In and America's Pledge burst on the scene in response to the Trump administration's stepping out of the Paris Agreement. So when we get to 2021, I'll talk about this. Okay, so that's enough of trends. Let's think about our current moment, what's happening to us, and how we can use it to guide our work and improve our work. So if we think about how COVID-19 has changed our lives, this is a quiz for you today. There will be 2 pages of quizzes. Match the context listed here to the crisis. So if you were to look at these and read through them, climate, equity, health, and economic, which ones go with which? You get to think silently to yourself. All right, you'll get to see these again. I'm going to switch 5 seconds to the next one. All right, you have in your head which one's aligned with which, and I'll give you a chart as another way to look at it and process all of this data. So if we look at the crisis experience, moving across the screen, of climate, of COVID and how it affects health, COVID and how it affects the economy, and race and equity issues, you can see that there are lots of parallels, lots of commonalities. So every single one of those things that I listed on the last 2 slides goes with all four of the crises: climate, health, economics, and race. Our job is to figure out how to align our climate work along all four of these strategies for multi-solving, a term you are likely familiar with, of solving one action solves multiple problems, and focusing our efforts on things that have the greatest benefit for more people, which gives us the advantage of attracting support from people with different points of view or different missions in order to achieve goals that are better for all. Now, all of this work, this slide, was developed before we got to a Biden administration, not expecting that the Biden-Harris administration, would be articulating it as completely as they are. But for those of you who were able to attend the presentation by Gina McCarthy, you recognize that a whole of government approach is tackling all four of these issues at once. And the ways in which we can align our work with that is the sweet spot of our path forward. So this slide right here was crisis experience. This slide here is the crisis response. So all of these things apply to all four. Keeping that in mind will guide our most successful work. So that means that the lessons from decades of climate advocacy, they parallel the discoveries of fighting COVID-19 and managing the economic recovery, addressing inequality. Our response can address all four, and museums have opportunity to address all four of them. Now, each of you may choose 1, 2, 3, or 4, but the sector as a whole has the capacity. It doesn't mean that each of you needs to take all of them on. So I want to be very clear about that. So, but how do we do this collaborating for these co-benefits? So we've got some examples, and I have 4 that came to mind pretty quickly that I'll just name, I won't describe, but it tells me about how there's so much opportunity. I want to be clear though that, I've showed you trends, I've given you this list of how everything applies, but how it gets implemented at your site and your community is totally unique, and that's where the extra value is. And so the district capacity to create local responses and use local context for these solutions is the most powerful thing that you bring, and that I believe that museums bring to doing this work. So whatever the national trends are, whatever the national expectations are, the impact of your work, the extra value of your work is that you do it in your local context. And not the rest of the world doesn't understand that. I know that we do as design professionals and climate professionals, but that's one of the messages we have to share with other people, is that our local context matters the most, and it's where we have the most impact and should have the freedom to make the decision. So why do museums have that power? Remembering that our trusted status is about the only trusted status left in the museums in the United States at the moment, and we should capitalize on that. That we're really good at using language and creating solutions that are based on facts. That's a leverage point for us. We're good at innovation and creativity, and we just assume that, and we forget to broadcast to the rest of the world that innovation and creativity live inside our institutions. That's what we generate alongside our research and our facts. But they offer that extra value of helping communities learn to understand what people around them think. So when we get to the programming role of museums in climate worth, health, equity, creating empathy, understanding the role of empathy, understanding how to understand each other is a critical capacity that we offer to partners across sectors in doing this work. And then helping individuals and societies tackle this work. You guys know that there's the perpetual conversation of, does it matter if I recycle this, whatever? Individual actions matter when many individuals do them, right? And so when we can help society realize the value of those individual actions being coordinated and collaborative, then we are able to scale change. And as trusted institutions with facts, creativity, opportunity, we can demonstrate, share, and spread that message. So that's where we're leveraging our regular normal work to have greater effect on our community. But it's not just programming, it's our structures and our settings that help us be the spot where this happens. So currently I'm watching the COVID vaccination access issue, and they're creating all of these new places for people to go and get their shots. And we're hearing that there are people who don't want to go to those places. They don't trust the people offering the information. They don't trust the location where it is, or they can't find the location or have access to it. Well, where are museums in the vaccination process? Why are our parking lots and our visitor centers and our exhibit halls not on the list of places to consider for public access when they are trusted institutions, easily accessible, publicly available, well signed in the community, likely to have public transportation to them? Museums need to be considered in the mix. So that's just an example of the way our buildings and our settings can leverage some of this work. But also as settings for showcasing community resilience, whether it's actual infrastructure, or it is stories about resilience, or it is planning for resilience in your community. Our site is a perfect setting for doing all of that work. So we've got community-focused initiatives are happening all across the country. These are the 4 I tend to say, call these people about. When someone says, who's doing this work? I will give them the list of these 4. I would love to have a list of more. So as you think about the work that you want to do in the future and together, think about making sure that I and people like me know about what you're doing. So the way in which that the districts individually or collaboratively can amplify, showcase your work, get the message out, the better we will all be for it as opportunities for doing this work. My personal mission, besides making sure everyone thinks about museums as climate allies, is pulling down funding for them to be climate allies. And I can only access that funding if I have examples to encourage funders to think about this as a viable opportunity. So the more I hear about what you do and wish to do, the better I can be at being your ally in finding funding and pathways and partners for you to do good work. So now, 2021, I want to indulge in a little extra time on that. Let me watch my own time here so we have lots of time for questions. Let's think about what 2021 is offering us, because no matter how interesting our history is and what's happening now, we are at an amazing moment of new opportunity. And it has to happen fast. Because one, we have this 100-day honeymoon period, which is full of opportunity. The backlash from folks who are resistant to this for whatever reason is already starting and will only amplify. But more importantly, we have a political opportunity of significant financial support for work in climate in general, and hopefully for our work in the climate space, that has to make enough progress by 2022 and 2024 so that those who are skeptics are no longer skeptics by that point, but they understand how this climate work helps every single issue in our economy, in our health, in our society. They are confident and on board with it so that we continue the momentum past this current little moment. So the more we do in this right at this moment, right now, the more we start to implement, the more we will have accomplished by that end of that 4-year period. So what's happening now? I hope that many of you were able to attend the conversation with Gina McCarthy. We lost her a little early, which was too bad. If somebody needs a link to that and doesn't have it, Cindy can give it to you, I can give it to you. If you'd like to listen to that presentation, go ahead. The other presentation to listen to, if you can find it on Twitter, is yesterday's press conference when John Kerry and Gina McCarthy, so the international focus, which is John Kerry, and the domestic focus of Gina McCarthy, talked about how the two go together and what the future looks like. That's very valuable to watch, to understand completely that this is no longer a siloed sector, siloed type of work. We have an unbelievable opportunity to do connected work. And the more that we reach out and connect, the better. So what she's been talking about is that there's no need to stay in our lane, that this is whole of government approach. Just like we know in our bones, when someone says, what's the most important area of climate work to start in? The answer is anywhere you can and do it everywhere, because it affects everything, right? So now the whole of government approach is that every single department is asked to use the lens of health, economics, climate, and equity as they prioritize their program. And the best solutions, of course, will cross all of those sectors. So when she was making a presentation to us, she said, community-driven climate work is embedded in all of the work that we do, and that the federal funding will enable the work that is chosen to do in the states and the cities. So you have the autonomy on choosing the program. They're pipelining money in your direction. But our purpose is to care for those most at risk, to promote science and fact-based decision-making, and that by doing all of this work, we're sending messages to the private sector that they need to ramp up the finance mechanisms, the production mechanisms, the communication mechanisms, the investments that they make in their own businesses that align with all of this work. And just like those slides about COVID-19 and how it applies to all four sectors, she said those last 3 years have taught us a lot about how to be ready for this moment. It's brought us to this moment. Now, the COVID experience is just a year old. From the we are still in experience, that's 3 years old, from 2017 and the beginning of stepping out of the Paris Agreement. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But when someone in the group said to her, what can you do? What can we do to help you, Gina McCarthy, do your work? And she said, everybody needs hope. I need stories to share of hope. Well, we have the best stories. We have human stories. We have building stories, community stories. We have charismatic megafauna. We've got images that are better than anybody else's. So we have a sweet spot opportunity here to share all those stories, which leads me to some of the other stuff that we want to do here. Whoops, lost my, okay. So that was a whole of government introduction, and I'll follow up on the sweet spot stuff. But now we're going to look at the whole of society approach, which is the phrase that We Are Still In uses to talk about doing this work. So what is We Are Still In? In 2017, when we stepped out of the Paris Agreement on the 1st of June, a couple of things happened. On the big scale, Mike Bloomberg, the climate mayors, America's Pledge, huddled, and they said, we've got to do something about this. Even if the federal government isn't leading, we still have to do this work. And they created We Are Still In, which burst on the scene on the 5th of June, and it was a coalition. It's not its own nonprofit. It's a coalition of cause people, folks who feel, from businesses, universities, museums, zoos, gardens, historic sites, tribes, higher ed, who just think this stuff is important. But when they did that, they didn't have a cultural sector. And I was having the same thoughts. It's like, oh my gosh, they need to have museums because we connect with the public. 850 million people come visit us a year, right? We've got 35,000 sites across the country. We can send the message to the public, which has to make some decisions about voting for these things to happen. These visitors have to make decisions in their own life about what their practice, what their purchases are, what this green work is. So we can't forget those folks. Museums are the pipeline to it. They've got to include us. And by 2018, We Are Still In said, absolutely, we need to include you. We need to include religion. We need to include health as well. And so We Are Still In became something bigger. All right, now, oh, and I forgot to say World Wildlife Federation. World Wildlife Federation gave us the staff that led We Are Still In. Okay, now you fast forward to this moment where there's change in leadership and a couple of things happen. We no longer have to be filling in a gap where the federal government isn't. Now we get to be alongside the federal government, helping push things forward. And we get to shift more of our attention to cities and states and communities to do the work. We don't have to do as much shouting to the rest of the world. Don't forget, America is still trying to do its best. So please don't you give up on the Paris Agreement. We Are Still In was sending a message as much to the rest of the world to stay the course as they were to the United States. So that's why the shift is now to America is all in, because we've sent the message to the UNFCCC that says we plan on rejoining the Paris Agreement. And on the 19th of February, we will actually be back in. So now there's going to be a change. And not surprising, some of our leadership of We Are Still In was elevated to be an advisor to John Kerry on international climate policy. So as things started to shift, we became America is all in, or we will on the 19th. We're trying to realign ourselves to be a great partner to the federal government on national and domestic approaches, implementation. We're going to give them lots of thoughts about policy, but we're really going to focus on how can we implement it by driving money to folks who want to do good work. Now, how do we know that this work even matters? So in the absence of federal leadership, America's Pledge, which is the data arm for capturing our commitments to climate action, whether it's carbon efforts or, well, let me show. So this is America's Pledge, a map in 2019 of all of the folks who've signed on to do this work for We Are Still In, that almost 4,000 folks, right? And they did the work to look at all of those commitments. How close do they get us to the Paris Agreement goals of 50% reduction in emissions by 2030, neutral by 2050. And when they do all of the math, they get to, we can get ourselves to 37% of the 50, even during the COVID impacts. If you count all of the commitments for the folks that are part of We Are Still In who've said, we're going to cut down by X, we're going to do X. And this is what the categories look like. So their categories are maybe different than what we might use, but this is their version of sectors of energy, of climate commitments and change. And so these are the 5 categories. You see there's one here that during the COVID crisis, 2019 crisis, there's only one that didn't improve, and that was buildings. Well, we know that our buildings have a lot of work. We have a lot of work to do on our buildings in order to improve our situation. And we could change that, at least across our sector, that buildings could be part of this. All of these are important to us. Buildings is the one that's moving the least and has a significant impact. Maybe that's a sweet spot of opportunity for us. So I throw that out there as the current thinking going on in the field. So if we take all of that and we think about the challenge and the opportunity of what's next, we've learned that straight line thinking of carbon reduction was necessary and appropriate before, and now no longer enough to address the convergence of all 4 crises, what's required at the moment, and what's being expected by and funded by the administration. and that we have a special role in our communities to go, what is our particular service for the benefit of the community? And that we need to accelerate action in any means possible. And here are some of those things that I believe we have as an opportunity for ourselves. The first is to join the chorus of statements of commitment to climate. If your museum doesn't yet have a climate statement, putting it on the list for something to accomplish between now and Earth Day, I believe is very important. I'll tell you why Earth Day is important. Investing in collaborations and communities of practice, like what you've got now, I surmise is an extraordinary opportunity for us to leverage quality change to help each other change more. I don't see a whole lot of them. You guys are maybe the sweet spot for making that happen. And I'm very excited to see if it does and what you create with that. I believe communities of practice can really drive us forward. I haven't been able to initiate any on my own. So I hope that you are able to. And should you need any resources in doing that, I would like to be helpful. What We Are Still In offers, and America Is All In, is access to platforms. Platforms through communication, information sharing, communication with the government as well about what you're doing and what you need. We'll also have Climate Week coming up and COP26. So Climate Week in New York City traditionally has been not focused on cultural institutions, but the Climate Museum folks and American Museum of Natural History have both been anchors, at least last year, for Climate Week, the year before last. But the global group of Climate Week that leads Climate Week has reached out to me and said, next year in New York City, we really want a bigger showcase for cultural institutions. And they said, the problem is we don't have the connection to the cultural institution. What we have is promotional infrastructure and organizational infrastructure. We can help you find venues, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, awesome, because what I don't have is communication, promotional, or access to venues, but I do have a connection to the cultural sector, and we are ready to rock and roll and showcase good examples. So my hope is that we can do a splash for Climate Week in September, probably the third week of September this year, a mix of online and in-person presentations, and do that same work for the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow in November of this year, which is the big UN gathering about climate. Last year, there were a bunch of cultural institutions that participated through the US Climate Action Center, hosted by World Wildlife Federation. That same US Climate Action Center will be available through America Is All In, so that we can showcase you, or if you're coming, give you a platform. And we expect now, with the federal government return to participation, there will be that office that has opportunities as well. So domestically and internationally, we have an opportunity to show the good work we do, and I'm hoping that all of us can contribute to that by the end of the year. So this is that schedule of what we'd like to accomplish in the next year. The middle one here, this nationally determined contributions. The United States apparently plans to have its NDC available on Earth Day to show what the US commitments are to the goals of the Paris Agreement. I am personally committed to making sure that cultural institutions have a very visible presence in that NDC report. No, we don't have the same impact as Microsoft or Amazon does. We still have very powerful, valuable impact. And the statement America Is All In means that everybody has to participate. And I want to make sure that they see that we are, and that they know that we make really good partners for helping other people have great contributions to this work. So that's what my calendar, Sustainable Museums calendar, looks like for the next year, and We Are Still In, and anyone else who wants to participate in that work. So I'll give you, let's see, how are we doing on time? Really quick discussion of a number of things are going on. in the cultural sector in particular. An NEH-funded project on life cycle assessment of collections care. I will send Cindy a link to a webinar on February 11th that is free that you might like to attend if collections care issues are important to you. Reopening the conversation about the plus minus dilemma. So collections environments, temperature and humidity, and whether or not we change set points to reflect the condition, the type of collections we care for, and building operations for when there are people in the building or not, whether we allowed setbacks and nighttime setbacks or drifting. So this conversation about the plus minus dilemma is being reopened, and we're not quite sure how to do it. We're just getting started. So anyone interested in that conversation, I would really like to hear from you and include you in my think group about that process. There are 2 grants underway. One is, well, no, grants applied for, hoped for, that we would hear about in the fall. So an IMLS National Leadership Grant on establishing energy footprints for museums as a way to scale an understanding of the impact of the sector and provide individual institutions with guidelines for thinking about how to improve their own operations. And then a National Science Foundation grant that would map city-based connections that give us a way to think about how we can share climate information and climate action through our networks based in particular cities. So we're doing the research, knock on wood, in New York City and Boston with cultural networks there, and using that to establish a research mechanism, a research protocol that we can then test in a couple other cities. And I'd love to work with 2030 districts on this to see that it becomes a protocol we can roll out. So anybody can adopt this method in order to demonstrate to funders, these are what our impacts are and why you should support our work. And then the last moment, I'm sorry to be so cryptic, but it's not until a week from today that I can say out loud and provide you the direct link to an application for an energy fund for visual arts museums. But on that day, I will have that data and I will share it with Cindy so that she can share it with all of you. What can you do? Climate statements, get ready for the USNDC. Hopefully you'll be interested in engaging with America is all in. There is no cost to participate. There's only openness that everyone be in the same conversation and sharing information and working in the same direction. And I hope that you'd like to participate in Climate Week and COP26. There's my information. I hope to hear from you. I'll stop sharing now.
Sarah, thanks so much. That was such a great presentation. We have a lot of questions in the chat. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. Connie is going to monitor, and I'm going to turn it over to Connie to go through them, and let's get to some questions.
Sure. I don't think we're going to get to all of them, so what I'm going to do is just put them in order. 1 second, I just need to scroll back up to the top.
If somebody sends them all to me, I'll try and answer them offline too, what we don't get to.
Oh, that's a great idea. Okay. All right. Well, I'll start with the very first one that we received from Allie. And she says, how can we collectively advocate the value of museums as a trusted community resource in order to secure government funding and other grants and resources to carry out sustainability initiatives?
There will be a gazillion ways to do it. I think the biggest gap in doing it is that we don't yet have an aligned voice. And through We Are Still In, we can amplify the voice, and working with you guys to come up with that case that so that someone other than Sarah says there are 850 million, 35,000, we are the most trusted. I mean, we have all that data and research, and we need to amplify that. So making that a priority to do cooperatively, I think would be really valuable.
Great. Okay, so Amy Sutton asks, museums are absolutely centers for civic and community engagement, but not all groups feel welcome in the halls of the museums. How can we bring these communities in and engage them more, especially on the climate topic?
I think that partners with our affinity groups, whether it's the diversity and inclusion group that might be with Association for State and Local History or with AAM, give us good allies in doing that. Trying to do it alone is contraindicated because it's not an alone type activity. It's a collaborative activity, right? And we need to appreciate that the conversation of developing these is as important as the product we develop. You know, we've all been trained to do straight line work, get the exhibit done on time and deliver it to the public. But we've also learned that the process of working with a community to develop a really good exhibit is just as important as the exhibit. And that applies in this case as well.
Great. Okay, Dr. Erin Meyer asks, how can we come together as a community to advocate for federal infrastructure funding to support facility upgrades and new facilities that embrace sustainability at the core?
Great.
It's another funding.
We are, so America is All In is making sure that we are specifically included, well, no, attempting to make sure that we are a clear path identified in the infrastructure rollouts. Making sure that cultural institutions are not overlooked in the crush to support states and cities is my mission. And
Great.
the way, if we can compile the list of needs, I mean, the number, the cost of your project, the impact of your project, the implementation of the project, if we can aggregate that and hand it to the America Is All In folks and say, when you're doing that letter, this is the gap we can solve for you. That's a missing thing for me right now.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Thank you. Okay, Leslie Tom would like to know, is the We Are All In tied, we are still in, tied to America's Pledge?
America's Pledge is one of the secretariat leaders of America Is All In. So it's organized like the UN does its secretarial leadership. So there are three bodies that organize it. With America Is All In, America's Pledge is going to have a more central role, and there should likely be even more funding for that data collection and sharing. But America's Pledge will remain our best ally for documenting the work. And it's like the data arm for We Are Still In, and will feed directly into the nationally determined contribution process. So that's our path to that.
Okay. The rest of her question, I think we have time probably for one more, is can you describe more about the reopening and broadening plus/minus movement?
So it seems to me that this great opportunity to re-examine our hugely intensive energy consumption for caring for collections needs to be revived. We started it. We got good information. We did all the science. We put, or I didn't, talented people did that. They put the facts out there, and we know that facts don't change minds and behavior. So the facts are out there, but the implementation is really uneven. We don't know how much of an opportunity there is there. We also are not quite sure what all the roadblocks are to taking us take up on the opportunity. So what I'm trying to do with my partner, Stephanie Shapiro, is to interview the folks who are engaged in this work right now and see what the barriers are to implementation, and collect enough information sort of on the state of the practice at the moment that we see a clear path for what needs to happen to go forward. So that if, like, say, there's a funding opportunity for doing more research or doing more implementation, we will have a case of what current practice is and what needs to change so that we can fund the change. But also just plain provide more information. You know, we find out that the conservators say, I'm willing to do this, but I can't get my facilities team to agree. So there's information missing that helps all of the partners feel confident and comfortable in making this change, which is against tradition of 70 degrees plus or minus 2, 50% plus or minus 5-degree change. 5% change, sorry, for
Great.
humidity.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I think we'll just take the rest of the questions via email. Just let us know and we will get them over to Sarah. And I think Cindy's going to wrap things up. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was wonderful to have you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Connie. Thanks for manning the chat and taking care of the questions. And Sarah, again, thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. I'll share my screen for one last slide. There we go. So what we're hoping for this group is for quarterly meetings, and we've chosen the last Thursday of the month, again, quarterly at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So April 29th, July 29th, and October 28th, if you want to mark your calendars. We're going to send a short survey out, hopefully today yet. And again, we want this to be your group. And so we want this to be of value to you. None of us need extra meetings that don't bring value. So we're going to send out a short survey asking you how you think this group should be set up, what kind of topics you'd be interested in speaking about. If you have any suggestions for future speakers, although Sarah's going to be a hard act to follow. And so forth. So we'll leave it there. When you get the survey, if you could complete it in the next day or two, we'd appreciate it. I'll also send out the recording of this session along with the few links that Sarah mentioned in her presentation. So if we have nothing else in the chat, we will go ahead and close for the day. Thanks everyone for participating. We hope you enjoyed it. And we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cindy, I'm trying to stay on for a minute and print off the rest of these questions, but I don't really know how to do it from the chat function or if we'll be able to get back into them.
Yeah,
There's kind of more generic questions that a couple people were kind of asking the group, I think, and communicating. I'd love to print out this chat.
I'm just going to copy it for now onto a.
Oh, like right, like
I'm
just
gonna copy and paste if I can before it
I
disappears.
think I'm going to try. Yes, keep it up if you can, Cindy, because I think I'll try to snip it with my snipping tool. Like you can just snip what's showing on your screen.
yeah.
Let's see.
There's an option to share the chat, to save the chat, which I did,
Oh,
but I don't know
good.
where it saves to.
I think
That's
it's
not
the
me.
same place as the
Coming.
cloud.
I just don't know. I'm
I
sitting
just
here
saved it
thinking
in
to
Word.
myself, how do I not know how to do this? Yeah, don't hang up. Don't stop
And
it
no,
yet.
I'm not going to end it.
Yeah.
But you know what? Stop the recording.
Yes. Okay. Good. Good thought.